The sun had been beating down on Flynn Whitmore's neck for 3 straight hours when he saw what looked like a mirage stumbling across the red sand dunes ahead of his cattle, heard a figure walking barefoot, stumbling, clearly in distress. He squinted against the glare and realized with a jolt that the figure had green skin. Flynn pulled his horse to a stop and raised his hand to signal the 2 ranch hands trailing behind the cattle. The herd of 30 head continued their slow plodding toward the watering hole another 5 miles ahead, but Flynn's attention was fixed on the figure that had just collapsed onto the sand. He urged his horse forward at a trot, leaving the cattle behind. As he drew closer, his suspicions were confirmed. She was an orc, a young woman by the looks of it, maybe 20 years old, with dark green skin that was badly sunburned and cracked from exposure. Her black hair hung in matted tangles down her back, and her clothes were little more than rags. She wore the remnants of what might have been leather armor once, but now it was torn and useless. Her feet were bloodied and raw. Flynn dismounted quickly and knelt beside her, pulling his canteen from his belt. She was conscious, but barely, her yellow-gold eyes struggling to focus on him. When she saw his human face, she flinched and tried to crawl backward. "Easy," Flynn said softly, holding up one hand while offering the canteen with the other. "I am not going to hurt you. You need water." She stared at him with obvious suspicion, her small tusks visible as she breathed heavily through her mouth. Flynn could see her calculating whether this was a trick, whether he was about to put a knife in her ribs. He had seen that look before on wounded animals. "Look, you can take the water or you can die out here," Flynn said bluntly. "I've got cattle to move and a schedule to keep, but I am not leaving you to bake on the sand. Your choice." Something about his directness seemed to reach her. She stopped trying to crawl away and instead reached out with a shaking hand. Flynn passed her the canteen and watched as she drank deeply, too deeply. "Slow down," he warned. "You will make yourself sick." She lowered the canteen and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her chin. Up close, Flynn could see that she had been through hell. There were bruises on her arms, cuts on her legs, and the kind of hollow look in her eyes that came from days of running on fear and adrenaline. "What happened to you?" Flynn asked. She did not answer, just stared at him with those unsettling golden eyes. Flynn sighed and looked back toward his cattle. His ranch hands, Tom and Pete, had caught up and were watching from a distance, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Boss, we need to keep moving," Tom called out. "The herd will not wait." Flynn knew Tom was right. They were 2 days from the ranch already, and every hour in this desert was dangerous for the cattle. But he also knew he could not leave this orc woman here to die. Whatever prejudices he might have been raised with, whatever stories he had heard about orcs being savage or dangerous, this woman was clearly a victim of something terrible. He made a decision. "You two keep the herd moving toward the watering hole," Flynn shouted back. "I will catch up." "Boss, you cannot be serious," Pete protested. "That is an orc." "I can see that," Flynn said dryly. "Now get moving. That is an order." The 2 ranch hands exchanged glances but did as they were told, clicking their tongues to get their horses moving. The cattle lowed and continued their plodding march across the desert. Flynn watched them go for a moment, then turned back to the orc woman. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried, pushing herself up on shaking legs, but collapsed almost immediately. Her feet were too damaged to support her weight. Flynn cursed under his breath and looked at his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Daisy. The horse was his most prized possession, the most reliable animal he owned. "All right," Flynn said, more to himself than to the orc woman. "Guess we are doing this the hard way." He stood and walked over to Daisy, patting her neck. "Sorry, girl. You are going to have a different passenger for a while." He led Daisy over to where the orc woman sat and crouched down beside her again. "I am going to put you on my horse. She will carry you to the watering hole. Can you hold on to the saddle?" The orc woman looked at him with obvious confusion. "Why?" she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you will die if you stay here," Flynn said simply. "And I am not the kind of man who lets people die when I can help them." "I am an orc," she said, as if he had not noticed. "I can see that too," Flynn said. "Now, are you going to argue or are you going to let me help you?" She stared at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Flynn reached down and carefully lifted her, surprised at how light she was despite her muscular build. Orcs were supposed to be strong and hardy, but this woman felt like she weighed nothing at all. He settled her onto Daisy's saddle and adjusted her feet in the stirrups, though he knew her damaged feet would not be able to grip properly. "Hold on to the saddle horn," Flynn instructed. "Daisy is gentle, but you need to stay on." The orc woman gripped the horn with both hands, swaying slightly. Flynn grabbed Daisy's reins and started walking, leading the horse across the desert sand. The sun continued its relentless assault, and Flynn felt sweat dripping down his spine, but he kept walking. "What is your name?" Flynn asked after a while, more to keep the woman conscious than out of curiosity. "Greta," she whispered. "I am Flynn," he said. "Flynn Whitmore. I run a cattle ranch about 2 days south of here." "You should not help me," Greta said weakly. "Your people hate mine." "Maybe so," Flynn admitted. "But that does not mean I have to." They walked in silence after that, the only sounds the crunch of sand under Flynn's boots and the occasional snort from Daisy. Flynn kept checking over his shoulder to make sure Greta was still conscious and upright. The last thing he needed was for her to fall off and hurt herself worse. The watering hole came into view after about an hour, a small oasis fed by an underground spring, surrounded by scraggly desert shrubs and a few struggling trees. Flynn's cattle were already there, drinking deeply while Tom and Pete kept watch. When the 2 ranch hands saw Flynn approaching with the orc woman still on his horse, their expressions darkened. "Boss, what are you thinking?" Tom demanded as Flynn led Daisy to the water's edge. "You cannot bring her to the ranch." "I have not decided what I am doing yet," Flynn said shortly. He reached up and helped Greta down from the saddle, supporting her weight as her feet touched the ground. She gasped in pain, and Flynn quickly helped her sit in the shade of one of the trees. "Stay here," he told her, then walked over to where his ranch hand stood. "You know what the marshal will say if you bring an orc into town," Pete said urgently. "There are laws against harboring them." "She is not a criminal," Flynn said. "Look at her. She has been running from something, probably her own people if I had to guess." "That is not our problem," Tom insisted. "We have got enough troubles without adding an orc to the mix." Flynn rubbed his face tiredly. Tom and Pete were good men, loyal workers who had been with him for years. But they were also products of the frontier, raised to see orcs as the enemy. Flynn could not really blame them for their prejudices, even if he did not share them. "Look, I will figure something out," Flynn said finally, "but I am not leaving her to die. That is final." Tom opened his mouth to argue further but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he just shook his head and walked back to the cattle. Pete followed, muttering under his breath. Flynn returned to where Greta sat beneath the tree. She was watching him with those unreadable golden eyes, and he realized she had probably heard every word of the argument. "They are right," Greta said quietly. "You should not risk yourself for me." "Let me worry about that," Flynn said. He knelt down and examined her feet more closely. They were worse than he had initially thought, cut, blistered, and showing signs of infection. "These need to be cleaned and bandaged. When we get to the ranch, I will have our cook take a look at them. She knows more about medicine than I do. You are taking me to your ranch." Greta asked, surprise evident in her voice. You have somewhere better to be, Flynn asked. I have nowhere to be, Greta admitted. My clan cast me out 3 weeks ago. Flynn sat back on his heels. Why? Greta was silent for a long moment, staring at her damaged hands. Because I refused to kill a human child, she said finally. We raided a settlement on the border. There was a boy, maybe 10 years old. My war leader ordered me to end him. I refused, so they left me in the desert with nothing. Flynn felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard stories about orc raids, about the brutality and violence. But he had also heard stories that painted orcs as mindless monsters, and clearly that was not true. Greta had made a choice to spare a child, and it had cost her everything. That took courage, Flynn said quietly. It took weakness, Greta replied bitterly. That is what my clan said, that I had gone soft, that I was not fit to be a warrior. Then your clan is full of fools, Flynn said bluntly. There is nothing weak about mercy. Greta looked at him with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been confusion. Flynn could not quite tell. He stood and offered her his hand. Come on, let us get some food in you and get those feet wrapped. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow. Greta took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakened state, and let him help her to her feet. Flynn supported her weight as they walked slowly to where his bedroll was laid out near the cattle. Tom and Pete watched them but said nothing. Flynn helped Greta sit down and then went to his saddlebags, pulling out some dried beef and hardtack. It was not much, but it was food. He handed it to Greta and watched as she ate slowly, clearly trying not to devour it all at once despite her obvious hunger. How long since you last ate? Flynn asked. 4 days, Greta admitted between bites. Maybe 5. I lost count. Flynn felt a surge of anger at the orcs who had abandoned her. What kind of people left one of their own to die like that? But he kept his feelings to himself and instead focused on practical matters. We will stay here tonight and let the cattle rest, Flynn said. Then tomorrow we head back to the ranch. It will take 2 days of hard riding, maybe 3 with you injured. Can you manage? I can manage, Greta said, and there was steel in her voice despite her weakness. Flynn nodded. He believed her. There was a core of toughness in this orc woman that had kept her alive through weeks in the desert. She was a survivor. As night fell, Flynn set up his bedroll for Greta and took a spare blanket for himself, planning to sleep on the hard ground. Tom and Pete took first watch, sitting by the small fire and talking in low voices. Flynn lay down and stared up at the stars, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Bringing an orc to his ranch was going to cause problems. The nearest town, Copper Ridge, was not exactly progressive when it came to orc relations. There had been raids in the past, violence on both sides, and a lot of bad blood. But Flynn had never been one to care much about what others thought. He ran his ranch the way he saw fit, and if people did not like it, they could take their business elsewhere. Still, there was practical concern to consider. His ranch hands might refuse to work if an orc was living there. His suppliers might cut him off. The marshal might come sniffing around, looking for an excuse to cause trouble. Flynn sighed and rolled onto his side. He would deal with those problems when they came. For now, his priority was getting Greta to safety and letting her heal. Everything else could wait. He must have dozed off at some point because the next thing he knew, Pete was shaking his shoulder. Your watch, boss, Pete said quietly. Flynn sat up and rubbed his eyes. The fire had burned down to embers and the desert night was cold. He could see Greta sleeping fitfully on his bedroll, her body curled in on itself. Tom and Pete headed to their own bedrolls, and Flynn took up position by the fire, feeding it a few more sticks to keep the flames going. The night passed slowly. Flynn kept watch, listening to the sounds of the cattle settling and the occasional coyote howl in the distance. He found his gaze drifting to Greta more than once, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. She was pretty, he realized with some surprise. Even battered and exhausted, there was something striking about her features, the strong line of her jaw, the way her dark hair fell across her face, the curve of her small tusks. Flynn had never thought of orcs as attractive before, had never really thought of them as anything other than distant threats or cautionary tales. But Greta was real and human in a way that challenged everything he had assumed. Dawn came slowly, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. Flynn woke the others and got the cattle moving while Greta still slept. When she finally stirred, Flynn brought her more food and water. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Greta said, though Flynn could see she was still in considerable pain. "Thank you." "Save your thanks for when we get to the ranch," Flynn said. "Today is going to be rough." He helped her onto Daisy again, and they set out across the desert. The cattle moved slowly, which was fortunate because it meant Flynn could walk beside the horse and make sure Greta did not fall. Tom and Pete rode on either side of the herd, keeping the animals in line. The day was brutal. The sun climbed higher and higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Flynn rationed the water carefully, making sure everyone got their share. Greta did not complain once, even though Flynn could see the pain etched on her face every time Daisy took a step. They made camp that night beside a dry creek bed, hoping there might be water beneath the surface. Tom and Pete dug while Flynn helped Greta down from the horse and settled her in the shade of a large boulder. "You are doing well," Flynn told her. "Tomorrow we should reach the ranch by evening." "What will you do with me then?" Greta asked. Flynn had been thinking about that question all day. "I will give you a place to stay while you heal," he said. "After that it is your choice. You can stay and work if you want, or you can move on." "You would let an orc work on your ranch?" Greta asked incredulously. "Why not?" Flynn said. "I need help and you look like you know how to work hard." "I was a warrior," Greta said. "I do not know anything about ranching." "You can learn," Flynn said, "if you want to." Greta was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I would like that," she said softly, "to learn something other than killing." That night, as Flynn lay on the hard ground staring up at the stars again, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had made a promise to Greta, and he intended to keep it. But he knew the challenges ahead would test both of them. The next day dawned clear and hot. They broke camp early and pushed hard, trying to cover as much ground as possible before the heat became unbearable. The cattle were tired and irritable, but Tom and Pete kept them moving. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Flynn spotted the familiar landmarks that meant they were close to home. The twisted Joshua tree that marked the boundary of his property. The rocky outcropping where he had once seen a mountain lion. The gentle rise that led down into the valley where his ranch house stood. "Almost there," Flynn told Greta, who had been silent for most of the day. She nodded wearily, her skin even more sunburned than before. Flynn made a mental note to have Martha, his cook, make some salve for that. The ranch came into view. As they crested the rise, a sprawling collection of buildings including the main house, the bunkhouse where his ranch hands slept, the barn, and various outbuildings. Fences marked off pastures where horses grazed, and a windmill turned slowly in the evening breeze, pumping water into a large trough. It was not much, but it was home. Flynn had built most of it with his own hands after buying the land 5 years ago. Every board, every nail, every fence post represented sweat and determination. As they drove the cattle into the holding pen, Martha emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had been Flynn's cook and housekeeper since the beginning, and she ran the domestic side of the ranch with an iron fist. "About time you got back," Martha called out. "I was starting to." She stopped mid-sentence as she caught sight of Greta on the horse. Her eyes went wide. "Flynn Whitmore, is that an orc?" "Her name is Greta," Flynn said calmly as he led Daisy toward the house. "She needs food, medical attention, and a place to sleep." Martha's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "You brought an orc to the ranch. Have you lost your mind?" "Probably," Flynn admitted. He helped Greta down from the horse and she swayed on her feet. "But right now she needs help and I am going to give it to her. Are you going to help me or not?" Martha stared at him for a long moment, then at Greta, then back at Flynn. Finally, she sighed heavily. "Bring her inside. I will heat some water for washing and see what I can do about those feet." Flynn felt relief wash over him. He had been fairly certain Martha would help. She had too good a heart to turn away someone in need, but it was still good to have confirmation. He helped Greta into the house, supporting most of her weight as they climbed the 3 steps to the porch. Inside, the main house was simple but comfortable. The front room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a long table in the center. Doors led off to bedrooms in the back. Martha bustled around, heating water in a large pot over the fire and gathering clean rags. "Set her down in that chair," Martha ordered, pointing to a sturdy wooden chair near the table. Flynn helped Greta sit, then stepped back. Now that they were in the light of the house, he could see just how badly damaged she was. Her feet were swollen and discolored, her skin cracked and peeling from sun exposure, her clothes barely holding together. "You look like you have been through hell and back," Martha said to Greta, not unkindly. "Let us see what we can do about that." She knelt down and carefully examined Greta's feet, clicking her tongue at what she saw. "These are infected. I will need to clean them out and apply poultices." "It is going to hurt." "I can take pain," Greta said quietly. "I bet you can," Martha said. She looked up at Flynn. "Get her some whiskey. She will need it." Flynn retrieved a bottle from the cupboard and poured a generous measure into a tin cup. Greta drank it in one go, barely flinching at the burn. Flynn poured her another, which she also downed quickly. Martha worked with practiced efficiency, washing Greta's feet in the warm water and then carefully cleaning out the infected wounds. Greta gritted her teeth but did not cry out, even when Martha applied a stinging herbal paste to the worst of the cuts. "You are tougher than you look," Martha commented as she wrapped Greta's feet in clean bandages. "There. Keep those clean and dry and stay off your feet for at least a week. I will change the bandages every day." "Thank you," Greta said, and there was genuine gratitude in her voice. Martha stood and looked at Flynn. "She needs food and rest. I will heat up some stew." While Martha prepared the food, Flynn sat across the table from Greta. She looked exhausted, her eyes half closed. But there was also something else in her expression, a kind of confused wonder, as if she could not quite believe what was happening. "Why are you doing this?" Greta asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be dangerous." "Are you dangerous?" Flynn asked. "I was trained to be," Greta said, "but I do not want to be any more." "Then you are not," Flynn said simply. "People are not just what they were trained to be. They get to choose." Martha set a bowl of steaming stew in front of Greta along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat slowly," she advised. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." Greta ate carefully, savoring each bite as if it were the finest meal she had ever tasted. Flynn watched her, feeling something shift in his chest. He had made the right decision bringing her here. He was sure of it. After Greta finished eating, Martha showed her to the spare bedroom, a small room that had once been used for storage but which Flynn had converted into a guest room. It was not fancy, just a bed, a dresser, and a small window, but it was clean and comfortable. Rest, Martha told Greta firmly. You need sleep more than anything else right now. Greta nodded and lay down on the bed, not even bothering to remove her tattered clothes. Within moments, she was asleep. Flynn and Martha returned to the main room. Martha fixed him with a stern look. All right, now you can explain to me what you were thinking bringing an orc here. Flynn told her the whole story, finding Greta in the desert, learning why she had been cast out, his decision to help her. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, Martha sighed. You have got a good heart, Flynn Whitmore, but sometimes I worry it is going to get you killed. Do you have any idea the trouble this could cause? I have some idea, Flynn admitted, but I could not leave her to die. No, I suppose you could not, Martha said. That is not who you are, but you had better be prepared for pushback. Tom and Pete are not happy about this, and when word gets to town, there will be hell to pay. Let there be hell then, Flynn said. I am not turning her out. Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Then we had better figure out how to make this work. Over the next week, Greta slowly began to heal. Martha changed her bandages daily and made sure she stayed off her feet. Flynn brought her meals and sat with her sometimes, talking about the ranch and his plans for the future. Greta was a good listener, asking intelligent questions and showing genuine interest. Flynn learned more about her during those conversations. She had been born into the warrior caste of her clan, trained from childhood to fight. Her parents had been proud of her prowess in combat. But somewhere along the way, Greta had started questioning the purpose of all the violence. The raid on the settlement had been the breaking point. When she refused to kill the child, she had known her life was over. I have been thinking about that boy a lot, Greta told Flynn one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. I wonder if he survived. I wonder if my choice mattered. It mattered, Flynn said. Maybe not to the world, but to him it did, and it mattered to you. Greta looked at him, and Flynn saw something soft in her expression. You are different from what I was taught humans were like, she said. I was told you were all cruel and treacherous. We are not all that different, Flynn said. Some humans are cruel, some orcs are cruel. Most of us are just trying to survive and do the best we can. I like that way of thinking, Greta said quietly. As Greta healed, Flynn found himself looking for excuses to spend time with her. He told himself it was just to make sure she was settling in, that she felt welcome. But the truth was, he enjoyed her company. She was smart and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. When she smiled, which was rare, it transformed her entire face. The ranch hands were a different story. Tom and Pete kept their distance from Greta, treating her with cold politeness at best. The other hands who lived in the bunkhouse were even worse, muttering darkly about having an orc on the property. Flynn called a meeting after the first week, gathering all his employees in the barn. There were 6 ranch hands in total, plus Martha. Flynn stood before them and laid down the law. Greta is staying, he said flatly. She works for me now, same as all of you. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and leave. There was grumbling, but no one left. Times were hard on the frontier, and jobs were scarce. Flynn knew they would stay, even if they did not like the situation. I expect her to be treated with respect, Flynn continued. No harassment, no insults, no violence. If I hear about anyone giving her trouble, that person will be gone. Am I clear? There were reluctant nods and muttered agreements. It was not ideal, but it was a start. After the meeting, Tom approached Flynn privately. Boss, I respect you, and I will do what you ask, he said. But I want you to know that I think this is a mistake. Orcs and humans do not mix. It is the way of things. Maybe it is time to change the way of things, Flynn said. Tom shook his head but said nothing more. By the end of the second week, Greta was well enough to walk short distances. Flynn found her small tasks to do around the ranch, mending fences, feeding the chickens, helping Martha in the garden. Greta threw herself into the work with fierce determination, as if she needed to prove her worth. Flynn watched her one afternoon as she struggled to repair a broken gate. Her hands were still healing, making the work difficult, but she refused to give up. Finally, Flynn walked over and knelt beside her. "Let me show you," he said gently. He demonstrated how to bind the broken wood with wire, his hands moving with practiced ease. Greta watched intently, then tried it herself. This time she got it right. "Good," Flynn said, and was rewarded with one of her rare smiles. "I am not used to building things," Greta admitted. "Only destroying them." "Then you are learning something new," Flynn said. "That is always a good thing." As the days turned into weeks, Flynn noticed a change in the atmosphere around the ranch. The hands were getting used to Greta's presence, even if they did not exactly welcome it. She worked hard, never complained, and kept to herself. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect her. Martha was the first to truly warm to Greta. Flynn caught them laughing together in the kitchen one day, and the sound made something in his chest tighten with an emotion he did not quite understand. Flynn was starting to realize that his feelings for Greta were becoming more than just concern for her welfare. He found himself thinking about her at odd times, wondering what she was doing, whether she was happy, if she ever thought about him the way he thought about her. It was confusing and more than a little frightening. He had never been in love before, had always been too focused on building his ranch to worry about romance. And even if he wanted to pursue something with Greta, there was the matter of social taboo. Human-orc relationships were not just unusual, they were forbidden in most frontier settlements. Still, Flynn could not seem to help himself. He sought out Greta's company more and more, finding excuses to work alongside her. They repaired fences together, moved cattle from one pasture to another, and spent long evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about a month after Greta's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The air was cool, and Flynn had draped a blanket over Greta's shoulders without thinking about it. She had accepted it with a small nod of thanks. "I never thought I would feel safe again," Greta said quietly. "When my clan cast me out, I thought my life was over. But here, with you, I feel like maybe I can have a future after all." Flynn felt his heart skip. "You can," he said. "You can have whatever future you want." Greta turned to look at him, and in the dim light her golden eyes seemed to glow. "What about you, Flynn? What future do you want?" Flynn opened his mouth to give some safe, non-committal answer but found he could not. Instead, he said the truth. "I want you to stay, not just as a worker but because I want you here. I like having you here." Greta's eyes widened slightly. "Flynn, you should not say things like that. People already talk about the human who harbors an orc. If they knew you had feelings for me, it could destroy you." "I do not care what people think," Flynn said. "I stopped caring about that a long time ago." "But I care," Greta said urgently. "You saved my life, Flynn. You gave me everything when I had nothing. I will not let you throw away your reputation, your business, maybe your life for me." "That is my choice to make," Flynn said stubbornly. They stared at each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Finally, Greta looked away. "I should go to bed," she said quietly, standing up and handing Flynn the blanket. "Thank you for talking with me." She went inside before Flynn could say anything else. He sat on the porch for a long time after that, staring at the stars and trying to sort out his tangled feelings. Things were awkward between them for a few days after that conversation. Greta avoided being alone with Flynn, and when they did interact, she was formal and distant. It hurt more than Flynn wanted to admit. Martha noticed, of course. She had a way of seeing everything that happened on the ranch. "You told her how you feel, did you not?" Martha asked Flynn one morning as he sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee. Flynn did not bother denying it. "How did you know?" "Because I have eyes," Martha said, "and because I have seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you too when she thinks no one is watching." Flynn's head snapped up. "She does." "Of course she does," Martha said, rolling her eyes. "That girl is head over heels for you, but she is scared. Can you blame her? She has lost everything once already. She does not want to be the reason you lose everything too." "I would not lose everything," Flynn protested. "Would you not?" Martha challenged. "What do you think will happen when word gets to town that you are courting an orc? The marshal will come sniffing around, looking for any excuse to arrest one or both of you. Your suppliers will cut you off. Your ranch hands will leave. You will be ostracized." Flynn set his coffee down heavily. "So what am I supposed to do? Pretend I do not feel anything?" "I am not saying that," Martha said more gently. "I am saying you need to think carefully about what you are willing to risk, and you need to make sure Greta understands that you have thought it through, that this is not some impulsive decision you will regret later." Flynn absorbed that. Martha was right, as usual. He needed to show Greta that he was serious, that his feelings were not going to change just because things got difficult. An opportunity presented itself a week later. One of the neighboring ranchers, Harold Mason, was throwing a barn dance to celebrate his daughter's wedding. It was the social event of the season, and everyone from the surrounding ranches would be there. Flynn had received an invitation weeks ago and had planned to go, but now an idea was forming in his mind. He found Greta in the garden, pulling weeds with Martha. "Can I borrow you for a minute?" he asked. Greta looked surprised but nodded, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. They walked away from the house, out toward one of the empty pastures where they could talk privately. "There is a dance tomorrow night at the Mason Ranch," Flynn said. "I want you to come with me." Greta stared at him as if he had just announced he was planning to fly to the moon. "Flynn, that is insane. I cannot go to a human dance." "Why not?" Flynn asked. "Because I am an orc," Greta said, as if stating the obvious. "I will not be welcome. People will be angry, maybe even violent. Let them be angry," Flynn said. "I am tired of hiding how I feel about you. I am tired of pretending that what other people think matters more than what we want." Greta shook her head. "You will be ruined." "Maybe," Flynn admitted. "Or maybe people will surprise us. Either way, I am not going to live my life in fear. I want to take you to that dance, Greta. I want to show everyone that you matter to me, but only if you want to go." Greta looked torn, her emotions playing across her face. Finally, she said, "You really mean it? You would do that for me?" "I would do anything for you," Flynn said, and realized as he said it that it was true. Greta's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. "All right," she said. "If you are brave enough to do this, then I am brave enough to stand beside you." Flynn felt a rush of something that might have been joy or terror or both. He had committed now. There was no going back. The next day was a flurry of preparation. Martha took charge, insisting that if they were going to do this, they were going to do it right. She found Greta a dress, a simple but elegant blue cotton dress that Martha had been saving for a special occasion. It took some adjustment to fit Greta's more muscular frame, but Martha was a skilled seamstress. When Greta emerged from the bedroom that evening, Flynn felt his breath catch. She looked beautiful. The dress brought out the gold in her eyes, and Martha had helped her wash and braid her dark hair. She looked nervous and uncertain, but also determined. "You look amazing," Flynn said. Greta ducked her head, a faint green blush coloring her cheeks. "I feel ridiculous." "You look beautiful," Martha corrected firmly. Now go on, both of you, and hold your heads high." Flynn helped Greta into the wagon. He had decided against riding horses, since Greta was still not entirely comfortable on horseback. The drive to the Mason ranch took about an hour, and Flynn could feel Greta's tension mounting as they drew closer. "We can turn back if you want," Flynn offered. "No," Greta said firmly. "I am done running." The Mason ranch was lit up with lanterns, and music spilled out from the large barn. Wagons and horses crowded the yard, and Flynn could see people moving around inside the barn, dancing and laughing. He pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Greta down. The moment they walked toward the barn entrance, conversations began to die. People turned to stare, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to outright hostility. Flynn kept his hand on Greta's elbow, guiding her forward. Harold Mason himself stepped forward, his face red. "Flynn Whitmore, what is the meaning of this? You cannot bring an orc to my daughter's wedding celebration." "Her name is Greta and she is my guest," Flynn said calmly. "I was invited to this dance and I am bringing a guest. That is allowed, is it not?" Harold sputtered. "But she is an orc." "I noticed," Flynn said dryly. "Now, are you going to let us in, or should I assume that the famous Mason hospitality does not extend to everyone?" Other people had gathered now, forming a half-circle around them. Flynn recognized most of them neighboring ranchers, shopkeepers from town, farmers and their families. Some looked angry, others merely uncomfortable. A few looked curious. Marshall Webb pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He was a hard man in his 50s with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty. "There are laws about orcs in town limits, Whitmore," he said. "This here is private property, but if there is trouble, I will have no choice but to intervene." "There will not be trouble," Flynn said. "We are just here to dance and celebrate like everyone else." "She should not be here," someone called from the crowd. "Orcs are monsters. She is a person," Flynn said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Her name is Greta. She works on my ranch. She is kind, hard-working, and brave. She saved a human child's life and was cast out by her own people because of it. If you have a problem with her being here, then you have a problem with me." There was muttering in the crowd. Some people looked uncertain now, others still hostile. Then a voice spoke up from the back. "Let them stay." Everyone turned. It was Harold's wife, Eleanor Mason, a soft-spoken woman who rarely involved herself in conflict. She stepped forward, her face kind. "This is a celebration of love and new beginnings," Eleanor said. "If Flynn wants to bring a guest, then we should welcome her. That is what decent people do." Harold looked at his wife in surprise, then back at Flynn and Greta. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but any trouble and you both leave." "Understood." "Understood," Flynn said. The crowd slowly dispersed, though the stares and whispers continued. Flynn led Greta into the barn, where tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians played fiddles and guitars at the far end. Couples were dancing in the center, twirling and spinning to the lively music. "I do not know how to dance," Greta whispered to Flynn. "Neither do I, really," Flynn admitted. "But we can figure it out together." They found a spot along the wall and stood watching for a while. People gave them a wide berth, though Flynn noticed a few curious glances, especially from some of the younger people. After a few songs, Flynn gathered his courage. "May I have this dance?" he asked Greta formally, offering his hand. Greta looked terrified but took his hand. Flynn led her onto the dance floor and they began to move. Flynn was not an especially skilled dancer, and Greta was completely inexperienced, so they stumbled and stepped on each other's toes more than once. But they were together, and that was what mattered. Around them, other couples continued dancing, though Flynn could feel the weight of their stares. Then, to his surprise, he saw Eleanor Mason approach the marshal and take his hand, virtually dragging him onto the dance floor near them. It was a gesture of support, subtle but clear. A few other people followed Eleanor's lead, not many, but enough. By the end of the song, Flynn and Greta were no longer the only ones on the dance floor, and some of the tension in the air had eased. They danced 3 more songs, growing a little more confident each time. Greta even laughed when Flynn spun her too fast and she nearly fell. It was a beautiful sound, and Flynn found himself laughing too. They took a break to get some food, and that was when things went wrong. A young man named Dale, who Flynn knew to be trouble, approached them. He had clearly been drinking. "You have got some nerve bringing that thing here," Dale slurred, pointing at Greta. "Walk away, Dale," Flynn said quietly. "You are drunk." "I am drunk enough to say what everyone is thinking," Dale said loudly. "Orcs killed my brother in a raid 2 years ago. They are animals, and you are a traitor for harboring one." Greta had gone very still beside Flynn, her face carefully blank. Flynn could see the pain in her eyes, though, and it made something hot and angry stir in his chest. "Your brother's death was a tragedy," Flynn said, keeping his voice level. "But Greta had nothing to do with it. She left her clan because she refused to kill humans." "Once a monster, always a monster," Dale spat. He reached out as if to shove Greta, but Flynn moved faster, catching Dale's wrist. "Do not touch her," Flynn said, his voice hard as iron. Dale tried to yank his hand free, but Flynn's grip was like steel. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Flynn saw the exact second Dale realized he had pushed too far. Dale's eyes flickered with fear, and he stepped back when Flynn released him. "You will regret this, Whitmore," Dale muttered, then stumbled away into the crowd. Marshal Webb appeared at Flynn's elbow. "I think it is time for you to leave," he said, though his tone was not unkind. Before things escalate, Flynn wanted to argue, but he could see the wisdom in the marshal's words. He nodded. "We were leaving anyway." He and Greta made their way out of the barn. Eleanor Mason caught them at the door. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "Some people will never change. But for what it is worth, I think what you are doing is brave. Both of you." "Thank you," Greta said, her voice thick with emotion. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Flynn could feel Greta trembling beside him, though she did not cry. When they finally pulled into the yard, Greta climbed down from the wagon without waiting for Flynn's help and hurried toward the house. Flynn caught up with her on the porch. "Greta, wait." She turned, and he could see tears streaming down her face. "I should not have gone. I should not have let you convince me. Now you have made enemies because of me." "I do not care about that," Flynn said. "Did you see what happened? Not everyone was against us. Eleanor supported us. Some of the younger people did not seem to care that you are an orc. Things are changing, slowly maybe, but changing." "Not fast enough," Greta said bitterly. "That man Dale, he looked at me like I was filth, and he was not the only one." "Dale is an idiot," Flynn said. "And yes, some people are going to hate us for this, but some people will surprise us. And the ones who matter, the ones we care about, they will understand." Greta shook her head. "I do not want you to suffer because of me." Flynn reached out and gently took Greta's face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Listen to me. You are worth it. Whatever consequences come from this, you are worth it. I am falling in love with you, Greta. Maybe I have been since the day I found you in the desert. I do not care that you are an orc. I care that you are kind and strong and brave. I care that you make me laugh. I care that when I am with you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." Greta stared at him, her golden eyes wide. "Flynn, I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything," Flynn said. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not pull away. Instead, she rose up on her toes and met him halfway. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, both of them uncertain. But then Greta's arms came up around Flynn's neck, and he pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened. It was sweet and fierce all at once, full of all the things they had not been able to say. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Greta rested her forehead against Flynn's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I love you too," Greta whispered. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid to even think it. But I do. I love you, Flynn Whitmore." Flynn felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like peace. "Then that is all that matters," he said. They stood there on the porch for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Inside the house, Flynn could see Martha peeking out the window. When she caught his eye, she gave him a small nod and a smile, then disappeared. The next few weeks were not easy. Word spread quickly about Flynn bringing an orc to the dance, and reactions were mixed. Some of Flynn's suppliers refused to do business with him anymore. A few of the ranch hands quit. The marshal came by twice, looking for excuses to cause trouble, though he found none. But there were bright spots too. Eleanor Mason visited the ranch, bringing food and words of encouragement. A few other ranchers who respected Flynn's skills came by to say they did not care who he loved, as long as he kept breeding quality cattle. And slowly, grudgingly, the town of Copper Ridge began to adjust to the idea of Flynn and Greta. Flynn and Greta grew closer every day. They worked side by side on the ranch, and in the evenings they sat on the porch talking and sometimes just enjoying the silence together. Flynn taught Greta more about ranching, and Greta taught Flynn some of the orc fighting techniques, though she insisted they were only for self-defense. 3 months after the dance, Flynn asked Greta to marry him. It was not a grand romantic gesture he asked her while they were mending a fence, covered in dust and sweat, but it felt right. "Marry me," Flynn said. "I know it will not be easy. I know people will talk and there will be problems. But I want to spend my life with you, Greta. I want to build a future together." Greta stared at him, tears filling her eyes for the second time since Flynn had known her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in a small ceremony on the ranch. There was no church that would perform a human orc wedding, so they had a traveling preacher who was more open-minded officiate. Martha served as witness, along with Tom and Pete, who had grudgingly come to accept Greta as part of the ranch family. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Greta wore the blue dress again, and Flynn wore his best clothes. They exchanged vows on the porch of the ranch house, with the sun setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I promise to stand by you," Flynn said, holding Greta's hands. "In good times and bad, when people support us and when they hate us. You are my partner, my best friend, and my love." Greta's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "I promise to protect you, to support you, and to build a life with you. You saved me when I had nothing, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Flynn kissed his new bride as Martha cheered and Tom and Pete clapped politely. It was not the wedding Flynn might have imagined as a young man, but it was perfect. That night, lying in bed beside his wife, Flynn felt a deep sense of contentment. They had overcome so much to get to this point, and he knew there would be more challenges ahead, but they would face them together. "What are you thinking about?" Greta asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "About how lucky I am," Flynn said. "I found you walking across the desert, and it changed my entire life." "I was the lucky one," Greta said. "You gave me everything: your horse, your home, your love. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw a monster." "You were never a monster," Flynn said firmly. "You were just lost. We both were, in a way, and we found each other." Greta tilted her head up to kiss him softly. "I love you, Flynn Whitmore." "I love you too, Greta Whitmore," Flynn said, and the name felt right on his tongue. The seasons turned and life on the ranch continued. Flynn and Greta worked together to build their future, expanding the herd and improving the property. Martha continued to run the household with her usual efficiency, and she and Greta became close friends. The town of Copper Ridge slowly grew more accepting of the unusual couple. It helped that Greta proved herself time and again volunteering to help when there was trouble, never responding to insults or provocations with violence, working harder than anyone else. People began to see her not as an orc, but as Greta, Flynn's wife, a member of the community. There were still difficult moments. Dale, the man who had confronted them at the dance, spread rumors and tried to cause trouble. But most people ignored him, recognizing him for the bitter man he was. The marshal never quite warmed to Greta, but he stopped actively looking for reasons to arrest her. A year after their wedding, Greta discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Flynn with a mixture of joy and terror. A half-orc child would face even more prejudice than Greta had. But when he voiced his concerns, Greta took his hands and looked him in the eye. "Our child will be loved," she said firmly. "And we will teach them to be strong, to be kind, and to never let other people's hatred define who they are. That is all we can do." Flynn nodded, drawing strength from her certainty. "We will protect them," he promised. "Whatever it takes." Their daughter was born on a spring morning, delivered by Martha with Greta's warrior strength and Flynn's stubborn determination to see them both through safely. She had green-tinged skin, softer than her mother's, and tiny budding tusks. Her eyes were a mix of Flynn's brown and Greta's gold, a warm amber that seemed to catch the light. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented. Hope for a better future. Hope for a world where humans and orcs could live together in peace. Flynn held his daughter for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face. She was perfect, every tiny finger and toe a miracle. When he looked up at Greta, exhausted but smiling, he knew that everything they had been through had been worth it for this moment. "She is beautiful," Flynn whispered. "She is ours," Greta said, reaching out to touch Hope's tiny hand. "And she is going to change the world," Flynn believed her. Looking at his daughter, at his wife, at the life they had built together against all odds, he believed that anything was possible. The years that followed were not always easy. Raising a half-orc child in a frontier town came with challenges. Some children were not allowed to play with Hope. Some parents whispered when Flynn and Greta walked through town. But there were also kind people, like Alina Mason's grandchildren, who became Hope's friends. There were neighbors who brought gifts when Hope was born and who treated her with the same kindness they showed any child. Flynn and Greta raised their daughter to be strong and compassionate, to work hard and to stand up for what was right. They taught her about both her human and orc heritage, never shying away from the difficult parts of either culture. Hope grew up understanding that she was unique, but that being different was not something to be ashamed of. As Hope grew, Flynn and Greta added to their family. A son came 2 years after Hope, then another daughter. Each child was different, some looking more human, others more orc, but all of them loved and cherished. The ranch prospered under Flynn and Greta's joint management, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair dealing. Flynn often thought back to that day in the desert when he had found Greta walking barefoot across the sand. He had given her his horse without a second thought, simply because it was the right thing to do. That one act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. He had never imagined that the green-skinned, exhausted woman he found dying in the desert would become his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in every sense of the word. But looking back, he could not imagine any other life. One evening, many years after that fateful day, Flynn and Greta sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown now, building lives of their own. Hope had married a kind farmer from a neighboring county, a human man who loved her for exactly who she was. Their son was working as a peacekeeper on the frontier, using his unique heritage to bridge the gap between human and orc communities. Their youngest daughter was training to be a doctor, determined to help anyone who needed it regardless of their race. We did all right, did we not? Greta said, leaning her head on Flynn's shoulder. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to Flynn, she was as beautiful as the day he found her. We did better than all right, Flynn said, taking her hand. We changed things. Maybe not the whole world, but our little corner of it. It started with you giving me your horse, Greta said with a small smile. Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. It was never about the horse, Flynn said. It was about seeing someone who needed help and choosing to give it. Everything else followed from that. Greta lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles. I love you, Flynn Whitmore. I have loved you from the moment you offered me water in the desert with no expectation of anything in return. And I love you, Greta Whitmore, Flynn said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. The desert stretched out before them, the same desert where they had met all those years ago. But now it was not a place of death and desperation. It was just the landscape of home, beautiful and harsh and full of life. In the distance, Flynn could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, a mix of human and orc and everything in between. They were the future, proof that love could bridge any divide, that kindness was stronger than hatred. Flynn tightened his arm around Greta and felt her settle more comfortably against him. They had built something lasting here, something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love and acceptance in a world that desperately needed both. As the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky, Flynn thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. All the challenges they had faced, all the prejudice they had overcome, all the moments of doubt and fear. And through it all, they had held on to each other and refused to give up. The cattle driver had found the orc girl walking barefoot across the desert, and he had given her his horse. But in truth, they had given each other something far more precious. They had given each other hope, love, and a reason to believe that a better world was possible. And in the end, that had made all the difference.